Have you ever felt that tiny knot in your stomach when someone says, "Hey, can I come over?" And it's not because you hate them. You might even like them a lot. But the idea of having someone in your space makes your shoulders tense, your brain starts scanning the room, and suddenly you're imagining everything that could feel off. The noise. The mess. The way you won't fully relax until they leave. Meanwhile, there's this quiet voice in your head whispering, "What's wrong with me? Why don't I enjoy this like other people seem to?" Because we're told, over and over, that having people over is normal. Healthy. A sign you're social, well-adjusted, maybe even successful. Cozy dinners. Spontaneous visits. Laughter echoing through the house. And if you don't crave that, the assumption is usually that you're antisocial, anxious, or secretly unhappy. But psychology paints a much more interesting picture. And once you see it, the discomfort you feel around guests starts to make a lot more sense. Let's start with something basic but powerful. Your home is not just a physical place. It's a psychological extension of your nervous system. Think about it. It's where you drop your guard. Where your body knows it doesn't have to perform. Where you sit the way you want, eat when you want, think without being observed. For many people, especially those who are introspective or sensitive to stimulation, home is where the brain finally exhales. So when someone enters that space, even someone you care about, it's not just a visit. It's an intrusion into your regulation zone. That word, intrusion, sounds dramatic. But it doesn't have to mean hostile. It just means your system now has to account for another presence. Another set of eyes. Another rhythm. Your brain starts running extra processes in the background. Am I being polite enough? Are they comfortable? Should I offer something? Is it too quiet? Too messy? Too me? Even if you're not consciously thinking these thoughts, your nervous system is doing the math. This is especially true if you're someone who's naturally more internally focused. Some brains are oriented outward. They regulate through interaction, stimulation, and shared energy. Other brains regulate inward. They stabilize through quiet, predictability, and internal dialogue. Neither is better. But when you have an inward regulating brain, having guests over can feel like trying to meditate in the middle of a shopping mall. Even if you like the people, the environment stops being yours. There's also the concept of territoriality, which sounds primal because, honestly, it is. Humans, like most animals, have a strong relationship to territory. But for some people, territory isn't about ownership or control. It's about safety. If you grew up in a home where privacy wasn't respected, or where you had to stay alert to other people's moods, your adult brain may have learned that my space equals my peace. Guests, even kind ones, can unconsciously reactivate that old vigilance. Your body remembers what your mind might not. And here's where things get misunderstood. Not liking guests over is often labeled as social anxiety. Sometimes it is. But often, it's not about fear of judgment at all. It's about energy management. It's about knowing that hosting requires a certain level of output you may not want to give in your safest space. You might be perfectly confident socially. You might enjoy deep conversations, meaningful connection, even hosting in theory. But the cost-to-benefit ratio feels off. Think of it like this. Imagine your mental energy as a battery. For some people, having others in their home charges it. For others, it drains it, slowly but steadily. Not because they're weak. Because their brain processes more information at once. Tone of voice. Facial expressions. Shifts in conversation. Environmental changes. It's like having extra tabs open in your browser. You can do it. You're just aware of the load. There's also an identity piece here that doesn't get talked about much. Your home is where your unfiltered self lives. The version of you that doesn't need to explain, adjust, or translate. When guests come over, even beloved ones, you often become a slightly edited version of yourself. You straighten up, literally and figuratively. You switch into host mode. And if you're someone who values authenticity deeply, that shift can feel uncomfortable. Like you're being pulled out of alignment. This is why some people would rather meet friends outside. A cafe. A walk. A neutral space. It's not avoidance. It's containment. In those settings, the social contract is clearer and more bounded. There's a beginning and an end. At home, the lines blur. How long will they stay? How do I signal I'm done without being rude? When do I get my quiet back? Psychologically, this connects to boundary sensitivity. People who are highly aware of their internal states tend to guard their boundaries carefully, not because they're rigid, but because they've learned what happens when those boundaries erode. If you don't like having guests over, there's a good chance you're someone who knows your limits well. You know how easily your peace can be disrupted, and you take that information seriously. There's also a cultural layer here. In many cultures, hospitality is moralized. Being a good person is equated with being open, welcoming, available. So when you don't want people in your space, it can trigger guilt or self-doubt. You might force yourself to host, then feel exhausted, irritable, or oddly empty afterward. And then you wonder why something that's supposed to feel good doesn't. But psychology would ask a different question. Not, "What's wrong with you?" but, "What is this preference protecting?" Because behavior that persists usually serves a function. Maybe it's protecting your nervous system. Maybe it's protecting your sense of self. Maybe it's protecting the quiet you need to think clearly, feel deeply, or recover from a world that already asks a lot of you. Interestingly, people who don't like having guests over often score high on traits like introspection and openness. Their inner world is rich. They notice subtleties. They think in layers. And that means their environment matters more. Noise, unpredictability, and social obligations register more strongly. It's not that they don't value connection. They just prefer it in doses and contexts that don't overwhelm their internal landscape. And let's talk about control, because that word gets a bad reputation. Wanting control over your space isn't about dominance. It's about predictability. When you're alone, you know what's going to happen next. When someone comes over, that predictability disappears. Even small uncertainties can create background stress. Where will they sit? Will they want to talk? Will they notice that thing you forgot to clean? Again, none of this has to be conscious to affect you. There's also something very human about wanting one place in the world where you don't have to be on. For some people, that place is rare. Work demands performance. Social media demands presentation. Relationships demand responsiveness. Home becomes the last refuge. So of course you're selective about who gets access to it. Now, here's an important distinction. Not liking guests over doesn't mean you don't like people. It means you care about how and where connection happens. You might prefer one-on-one conversations, or scheduled visits with clear boundaries, or hosting only when you have the energy, not out of obligation. That selectivity is not a flaw. It's a form of self-knowledge. Of course, there's a flip side. If avoiding guests becomes rigid, if it's driven by fear rather than preference, that's worth exploring gently. Sometimes discomfort is a signal of growth. Other times, it's a signal of mismatch. The key is honesty. Are you avoiding because you're anxious about being seen, or because your system genuinely functions better with more solitude? Those are very different things, and psychology treats them differently. What's fascinating is how often people who don't like having guests over are actually very good hosts when they choose to be. Because when they open their space, they do it intentionally. They're present. They're thoughtful. They've prepared themselves mentally. And that care shows. It's quality over quantity, applied to hospitality. So if this resonates with you, here's the reframe. You're not antisocial. You're not broken. You're not failing some invisible test of adulthood. You're someone whose nervous system, personality, and values intersect in a way that makes solitude and control over your environment especially important. That's not something to fix. It's something to understand. And understanding changes everything. It replaces guilt with clarity. It replaces comparison with self-trust. It lets you say, "I don't like having people over, and that's okay," without needing a long explanation. It lets you design your social life in a way that actually supports you, instead of draining you. So the next time someone asks to come over and you feel that familiar tension, pause. Not to judge it. Just to notice it. Ask yourself what your space gives you, and what you're protecting. Chances are, it's something valuable. If this made you see yourself a little more clearly, I'd love to hear about it. You can share your thoughts, or just sit with them quietly. Either way, the more you understand how your mind and environment work together, the easier it becomes to live in a way that actually feels like home.